Feels like a minor miracle. I got the camera to work with sound and all that. It's, I spent a little money to upgrade my microphone, and then when it doesn't work, it's like, what is up with that? But anyway, so we'll go back to the old way of doing things with the old microphone, not a cordless one, but anyways, we'll make it work. We are picking up this morning in Geneva. Last week, if you remember, I told you the story of Antonia Vax, that woman that got sort of used as a pawn by the Catholic Church, and she got swept up in this attempt to kill 3 Protestant leaders in Geneva. And she used a bowl of soup to try to do that, and the plot kind of fell apart, partly because she had, well, actually it was not so much her, but she had the one person, his family showed up, and off he went, and then the other person decided he didn't like thick soup, and so he asked for something a little different, and then the third person ate the soup and suffered lifelong consequences because of it. And then Antonia Vax has this major attack of conscience, and she tries to feed water to the person that had eaten the soup, and that didn't work. And she takes her kids and leaves Geneva and sets sail for a little city in France, and eventually she's caught, and then she's executed for her attempted murder, even though it was the Catholic Church that put her up to it. So, and I told you that story in part as a way of kind of setting the tone for what's going on mainly in Geneva, but really across much of Western Europe at the time. That story is just sort of one little illustration of how there's tension between Protestants and Catholics in Switzerland, but also in France much more, although the Catholics were much more dominant in France in terms of their power and their influence, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that later this morning. But I wanted to give you a sense of the tension and the conflict that's going on that is a result of the early part of the Reformation, what Martin Luther was teaching and what he was spreading around, and how that's beginning to take root across Europe. And it's really a very polarizing phenomenon, because you've got cities that are taking sides one way or the other, and which side is going to win, and it's stirring up all kinds of trouble in Europe. So I want to pick up the story there, but before I do, I thought it would be, I wanted to read from, well, if I say Psalm 119, everybody goes, oh no, how long are we going to be here? Because it's the longest psalm in the Bible, but it's a psalm that focuses on the value of God's Word. And a little fun fact, if you didn't know this, every paragraph is, it's an acrostic poem, and so every paragraph is named or follows the subsequent letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so there's 22 paragraphs, and by paragraph I mean, you see those little funny headings, Mem and Nun and Samek, and nobody knows what that is. Well, those are Hebrew letters, and so then every paragraph, every line in each paragraph starts with that letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's really a masterful poem, but the focus of it is all on the value of God's Word. And I'm just going to read one of those little paragraphs, but I'm reading this because the Reformation arguably was a reformation, was a revolution of God's Word. It was a return to Scripture. The people had, because of, the Scripture was not in the common language, and so the common people couldn't read it, and even many times the priests couldn't read it. So there's all these abuses taking place in the Catholic Church, and all these false teachings that are going around, and nobody knew any differently. And so when the Bible became available in the common language, when people could open their Bibles for themselves and then begin to read the Scriptures, that is what paved the way for the Reformation, and that's what stirred up this conflict between the Catholic Church and the Protestants. So, Scripture plays a central role then in what the Reformation was all about. It was a rediscovery of God's Word and the ability for people to read it themselves, and as my math teacher used to always say, their ability to check the work, right? To go back to what are the priests saying? What are they teaching us? And is that really in accordance with Scripture? And that's what the Reformation was really all about. So, with all that as a little preface, I'm going to start by reading the letter Nun, which to us is the letter N, from Psalm 119, which is verse 105 through 112. It says this: Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. I have sworn an oath and confirmed it to keep your righteous rules. I am severely afflicted. Give me life, O Lord, according to your word. Accept my free will offerings of praise, O Lord, and teach me your rules. I hold my life in my hand continually, but I do not forget your law. The wicked have laid a snare for me, but I do not stray from your precepts. Your testimonies are my heritage forever, for they are the joy of my heart. I incline my heart to perform your statutes forever to the end. Especially that first verse there, it was a Bible verse that was on when you walked into my high school, it was right above the office there, right when you walked in the door, that's what you'd see. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. The cry of the Reformation was that Latin phrase, post tenebrae lux, after the darkness, light. And indeed, that light was God's word. And that's what God used to bring about this transformation. Let's pray together and let's ask for God's blessing on our time together. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that your word, even today, is living and active, just as it was when it was first written, just as it was in the time of Luther and Calvin and the Reformation. Father, it has the power to transform our lives. Help us to hear what you are saying in your word. Help us to love your word and to live by it. Father, as we spend some time this morning studying again the Reformation and all that took place, deepen our understanding, not just of events as something that happened in the past, but something that continues to shape us and form us even today. We ask it and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. One of the things, and I think, Jerry, you asked a question about this a couple weeks ago. How is it that the church and the state ended up so closely bound together? That was one of the things, and I think that's an idea that's hard for us to wrap our minds around. But back then, it's important to understand that cities were, it's not just that their citizens were religious, one way or the other, whether Protestant or Catholic. It's that the entire cities adopted either Protestantism or Catholicism. So the cities themselves institutionally were identified and defined by religion, by the Catholic doctrine or the Protestant doctrine. And that meant that, so even if you didn't have necessarily all of the people in one city as Protestant, if the city was Protestant, then the city as an institution committed itself to Protestant teaching, Protestant doctrine, Protestant practice. And so you could still have Catholics in Geneva, even if Geneva was Protestant, but it was pretty hard to pull that off and vice versa. So Geneva, first remember, was a Catholic city, and you had Protestants in there even though it was still officially Catholic. But unlike, like today, so if you look at Salem, if you look at the religious makeup of people in Salem, you're going to find quite a range of people. You're going to find, Protestants, you're going to find Reformed people and Baptists and Pentecostals and Catholics and a whole host of things. And whatever of those is the dominant religion, I don't want to venture a guess because I don't know for sure what it is. Whatever is the dominant sort of denominational background, we would still say that Salem is not officially it doesn't adhere to any one official religion, right? I mean, you all kind of understand that's not really that complicated. But back then, the cities all adopted and practiced and adhered to their own particular religion. And so then that was what was taught, that was what was kind of officially meant to be preached in the churches and so on and so forth. So religion was not just a private enterprise. Yeah, question?
Does that mean that as a city, they wouldn't have other denominations as a church?
Well,
if they're committed to teaching those doctrines?
Yes and no. So you got to remember there really weren't denominations yet. You're starting to see them, but like today when you look at denominations, there's literally thousands of them. Back then you really had the Catholic Church, and then you had sort of branches within the Protestant church that are just kind of beginning to emerge, but in general they were just Protestant and they were just Catholic. Now, from the way that I understand it, in a city, even if a city was officially had adopted the teachings of Protestantism, you still could have some Catholics there, but especially as the Reformation went on, that became more and more risky. And
So there wouldn't be a Catholic church then in a Protestant town? I guess that's.
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I'm not, now, I don't know if that holds true everywhere, but in general, I don't believe that you'd have, I mean, I think once, so I'll just give you an example. St. Pierre's, where Calvin ministered, excuse me, St. Pierre's was a Catholic church. It was a cathedral built for the Catholic Church. Once the city adopts Protestantism in May of 1536, St. Pierre's, and probably even before that, it was beginning to flip, but then St. Pierre's was not a Catholic church anymore. Neither were the other churches. Now, I do know that many Catholics fled from Geneva once Geneva became a Protestant city. They all sort of scrambled like, well, I don't want to say like rats on a sinking ship, because that's a little derogatory, and I don't mean it that way. I just mean they could see the writing on the wall and they knew to get out of town. But I'm not sure if maybe they're still meeting in homes or something. I kind of doubt it. It doesn't seem like they would do that. And the same thing was true when cities were Catholic. The Protestants knew that best get out of town, because they, depending on where they are, like especially in France, Protestants were not welcome in France at all. Like France was especially hostile to the Protestants, and so that's why you get this mass exodus of French Protestants, the Huguenots, leaving France. Some of them went to England, but many of them went to Geneva and to other places around Western Europe. So, yeah, good question. Excuse me. So, religion is not just a private thing. It's not just something that people do in their homes. It's very much a public thing. It's adopted by the cities. It's practiced by the cities. Even as we're going to see later on, the city council had a really tightly woven together, was really tightly woven together with the church council. So like when you're practicing church discipline, like if a church does that today, it's handled by the consistory, by the elders. They, meet with an individual and they talk it over and they do whatever it is they need to do. Back then, if church discipline is happening, the town council is involved in that as well, and the town council is telling the church what to do, and that was a source of tension in the Protestant churches. Like Calvin didn't like the fact that churches that other cities were telling him what to do. He didn't like the fact that the town council was sometimes overstepping, in his judgment, overstepping boundaries and dictating when or to whom he could serve communion and not. And so that became a source of conflict within the cities. And it's kind of interesting later on, because Calvin writes a lot about what we now call, we'll get to that way later, but he writes about two kingdom theory, which is basically his way of saying church and government need to stay in their lanes. They need to, exercise control and authority in their respective spheres, but they shouldn't overlap. And I suspect a lot of that came out of Calvin's complicated relationship with the Genevan City Council. Michael, did you have a question?
What's your understanding of how people ended up linking civics with religion or spirituality in a way Israel didn't? I don't remember Aaron. The prophets could go at David. I don't mean that, but David wasn't doing the consistory meets the. Right? He wasn't doing that. No. So if they're not doing that, what's the linkage of power with spirituality makes us the right people?
That's a good question, and I'll just be honest, I don't know a good answer to that, but other than to say it goes back hundreds of years. This goes back to, probably 300-400 AD, because there you get, again, so you get little tiny communities and villages and things, and maybe you get a parish priest that sort of makes the rounds, and he's kind of overseeing all that, and it kind of makes sense that, the priest is just exercising authority. And my guess is that it kind of evolved over time, but yeah, Jerry.
I would think if I would go back to, I forget the name of the Roman emperor.
Constantine, probably.
Yeah. Also, he declared.
Yeah, he established Christianity as the official religion of Rome, which was really good if you're being burned in hot oil and burned at the stake and executed. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore. But then that wove Christianity very much into the official teaching of the state. So yeah, that's probably.
Constantine legalized Christianity, which is a whole lot better than being illegal.
Yeah.
And then it was later in the century, I can't remember the fellow's name, actually made it the official.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're probably right. I'm not an expert on that period of church history. But yeah, that very well could be. I mean, Constantine, he often gets credited or blamed depending on your take on it, on how that went down. But yeah, I mean, it was a lot of good because you don't want Christians being persecuted, which they were. But
There was a term that came to the fore too, went to Christendom. When Christendom, it became kind of like that part of the established,
right.
overall, beyond just the churches, it became part of the whole kingdom.
Yeah, right. And then you can kind of see naturally how it would unfold from there. Like you get it very much just baked into civil government, and and that's I'm gonna be very careful here, but because we're gonna come back to this when we get into the theology of Calvin. But that whole idea of two kingdoms, I think, is especially relevant for us today. When we think about how does church and state, how do we relate together? How do Christians and how do we be careful about sort of weaving in church and government and faith and religion and politics? Not that ever takes place today, but just okay. Okay, I don't know if any of you have ever played. You remember Othello? I think the game was called Othello. Any of you remember playing that game? Okay, I was worried for a second it was just some weird Canadian game that only I played. But the way the game works is, if you put down those little tiles, and then if you can catch your opponent's tile in between, then you flip it to, if you're white, and you put a white one and a white one around a black one, then the black one flips to white, and the goal is to try to get the whole board your color. What's that?
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a good strategy game, and if you've never played it, it's kind of fun, I guess. But as I was studying all this, that game immediately came to my mind, because what was happening in Geneva and in Europe was that you sort of get this game of spiritual Othello, where you get a city that's Catholic, and then it flips to Protestant, and then another one flips to Protestant, and then one maybe flips back to Catholicism, and so you kind of get this going back and forth between Protestantism and Catholicism, just depending on who's in charge and depending on who comes to power, and sometimes depending on the citizens rising up and revolting, and so you get this sort of momentum. It's kind of going back and forth to different places, and then at the same time, so cities are doing this officially, but one of the other factors that's going on at this time is the French persecution of the Huguenots. So Huguenots are French Protestants, or French, I call them French Calvinists, but they predate Calvin, so it's not really fair to call them Calvinists when Calvin wasn't really influential yet. But they're French Protestants, and like people like Guillaume Farel was a Frenchman, Calvin was a Frenchman, and I don't know that Calvin would necessarily be identified with the Huguenots, but he's certainly part of this movement as the French government is really zealous to maintain the Catholic faith all throughout France. They decide the best way to do that is to execute anyone who is Protestant, and so they're going out and they're like burning them with hot irons, and they're burning them at the stake and doing all kinds of these horrible things. So what happens? Well, all these Protestants, like I said earlier, they get out of Dodge. They know that the best thing for them to do is to leave France, and so you get all this mass exodus of French people, French Protestants, out of France. And where do they go? Well, they go to Geneva, or they go to London, or they go to Basel, or to Bern, or wherever else. Well, if you've got a city that's like, let's just say 50-50 Protestant and Catholic, and let's say for the time being it's a Catholic city, then you get a mass influx of these French Protestants. All of a sudden the balance goes way out of, it's not in balance anymore, and now it's heavily influenced by Protestants. And so, and furthermore, these Protestants are coming with this real zeal for their doctrine, for their beliefs, because they've been persecuted, they've been put to death, and so they're running for their lives. And people don't run for their lives, they don't uproot themselves and their family, and they don't leave their homes and their villages and their country for something that they're only sort of lukewarm with, right? They not only are they passionate about this, but when you have to flee for something, it almost makes you more zealous for that cause. And so these French Huguenots are passionate. We're going to see a little bit later, they're also, they're very poor, they don't speak necessarily the language, and so that comes into play a little bit later on. They needed, so there were a lot of ministries that sprung up to kind of take care of these refugees, including in Geneva, which we'll see after a little bit. Excuse me. So that's about the year 1523. So that's about 13 years before Calvin gets into Geneva. So this massive influx of Protestants. I was going to say a couple. A few things about what the Huguenots were doing: cutting off limbs, branding with hot irons, executing them. All these kinds of horrible things are going on. So. But the Catholic Church is fighting back. The Catholic Church is sending out like bishops and itinerant preachers and teachers to condemn this Protestant movement. They are desperate to keep Geneva square and other cities squarely in the Catholic camp. So they're sending out preachers and they're sending out these bishops to denounce all this Protestant teaching. There's this one occasion in Geneva where a Catholic bishop comes and he preaches a sermon denouncing the Protestants. This Catholic bishop stands up in St. Pierre. I think it was St. Pierre's. There were 3 Catholic churches in Geneva. I think it was St. Pierre's. And Antoine Froment, we met him last week because he was the one who ran the little Airbnb where Antonia Vax ended up staying. That was, it was his house. His name's Antoine Froment. He stands up in the church service and says, prove it, right? You're teaching, you're saying all these things that are, you're denouncing all the Protestants and you're maintaining Catholic doctrine. Let's see you prove it from the Bible. And that doesn't go over very well, as you might imagine. Understandably, I mean, if someone stood up, well, hopefully my sermons would be biblical and you wouldn't need to do that. But, it's a little disruptive, right? You're in the middle of a church service and someone, hey, prove it. So that goes over, as my mom would say, like a lead balloon. Now again, the Protestants are doing the same thing. They're standing up and they're preaching these fiery sermons in their churches denouncing Catholic doctrine. So you're getting like these preach-offs in these cathedrals where you get ones, not on the same day, but all these sermons going back and forth denouncing Catholic Church and denouncing Protestantism. And so the tensions in Geneva are rising. Like things are really getting heated and fired up. These are not like people come to church and listen to, oh, that was a really thought-provoking sermon. It's like they get fired up and they want to go get their Catholic neighbor. They want to go get their Protestant neighbor. So it's really quite something. Bern realizes that tensions are really high in Geneva. So Bern is kind of like a major city in it's the capital, I think, isn't it? My son's way better at geography than me, but I believe it is a capital of, if not of the country, it's the capital of the region. Anyways, I better not say anymore, I'm exposing my ignorance. But Bern sends down kind of a Catholic bishop to cool tensions, to just sort of, let's everybody take a breath. Let's all try to calm down here, and let's see if we can, reach some kind of resolution. And it sort of works. Like, tensions cool down. I'm not sure what this bishop said or what this teacher said, but he manages to de-escalate things, but only temporarily. Like, as you might imagine, like this is a powder keg, and you can sort of cool the things for a little bit, but the underlying problem hasn't gone away, because you still get the teachings of the Catholic Church and you still get the Protestants, and they are both very much in conflict. And this is one of these issues. There's not a lot of means towards compromise on this. They're just too far apart on that. And so tensions cool down, but only a little bit.
Question?
Yeah, fire away.
You're describing this, and what's coming to mind, the question's coming to mind is, in your opinion, when people were out to get their neighbors, did any of this have to do with I love Jesus?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think here's my response. I don't, yes and no, right? Because this is one of these things, we can be motivated by something good and right, and we can go about it all the wrong way. Is that true today? Yeah, probably so, right? We can, and we tell ourselves, that's the thing, like we tell ourselves we're just passionate for the truth. And the Bible wants us to be concerned for truth and defending doctrine, and yes, that's true, and that's right, and we should be passionate for the truth of God's word. Burning your neighbors, and the Protestants were doing that. That was more of a French persecution of the Huguenots. Burning people in hot oil is probably not the best way to be zealous for the truth. And even Calvin's opponents later on, they were, in their mind, zealous for the truth, and they would stand outside of his door all hours of the night and, firing off guns and the equivalent of playing really loud rock music all night long. All these things. Calvin, too, and we'll get to the story. Does anyone know the story of Michael Servetus? Anyone heard that name? Somebody? We'll get to that, but there's a case where Calvin and the leaders of Geneva and the church council were passionate for the truth, and they wanted to defend against heresy at all costs. And so they went about killing someone who believed in something that was heretical, but they ended up killing him. And it's like, was that love for Jesus? Yes, they love Jesus. No, killing someone that you disagree with is not a way of showing that love, right? So and so that's a reminder, maybe big picture.
It's not exactly loving your enemies.
It's not exactly loving your enemies, no. David.
I wouldn't advocate going back to those practices, but on the other hand, they took truth pretty seriously.
Yes,
I mean,
they did.
in our dealing with our civically righteous pagan neighbors, our Mormon relatives, and so forth, do we actually take seriously the fact that people are literally in eternal peril?
Yeah, right.
That they're teaching stuff that actually is, nowadays, if you say the wrong thing about some medical treatment, people, my understanding is you can't even publish a non-registered securities newsletter, or whatever, because you might mislead people about their investments. But you literally can be teaching stuff that will send people to hell, and that would actually cause and as far as the state's concerned, if you have people promoting things that could bring God's wrath upon the community, I don't think they handled it too well. But on the other hand, they took truth seriously.
The church throughout history has always walked that line between what does Jesus do, right? John 1:14, he came to us not just full of truth, and not just full of grace, but grace and truth together. And I will suggest to you that is one of the eternal challenges that we face as believers. How do we do both? How do we speak and communicate the truth in a way that is loving enough that our neighbor can hear it? Because here's the thing, if I come to you, I won't pick on any one of you, and just hit you with the truth and just lay it all out, I might be speaking the truth, but it's going to come to you in a way that you're not going to hear it, because I haven't shown you that I love you. And like David says, if I come to you and I just want to love you, and I just want to be nice and kind and say nice things, I'm not necessarily loving you either, because I'm withholding something that can be life-saving. Now, there's the ideal. Here we are in the realities. It's hard to do. I find myself coming back to that idea over and over again, because I find it really challenging. And my suspicion is that if I were to take a poll in this room, we'd probably get 50-50. Half, if I said, how many of you gravitate towards love? Half the hands would go, maybe a little more than half. You guys are pretty nice people. And then half the hands would go, not that truth is not nice, I'm just teasing, but half the hands would go up and say, I gravitate more towards just laying it out, being truthful, being honest, right? And that's just my observation. Like I've not done any research on that, but we sort of tend to gravitate towards one side or the other, and I think Christ-likeness calls us to be both. Tough love, but gracious love. So real quick, David, and then we've got to move on.
Well, some car dealer promotes believe in nice. The problem is nice is a four-letter word. We should be gracious, but I'm not sure nice helps.
There you go. Okay, Guillaume Farrell, we're going to run into him a number of times. He was filled with truth, let's just say it that way. Guillaume Farrell was a fiery French refugee. I believe he had like fiery red hair. I'm almost certain that's actually, Ryan's nodding his head. So I remember reading that, but then I was like, is that just someone's caricature of him, or is that actually real? And I think it was real. I think and so he was described as one of these, he was one of these very passionate people. And next week or the week after, when we get to how he invites Calvin to come into Geneva, you'll hear more about him. But he is as fiery and as passionate as they come. He upset a lot of people along the way and through the course of his ministry, but he was well, over time, he was very well respected and very involved heavily in ministry in Geneva. He arrives in Geneva in the year 1532, so these tensions are escalating. I'm not sure that putting Guillaume Farel into the mix really helped anything, at least not as far as de-escalating things. It probably only made things more intense. And then Antoine Froment is another man. He's the one we met last week. He shows up in Geneva as well. And Antoine Froment shows up, and he promises a couple of things. He says, number one, I will teach you English. I'll teach you, or not English, French. I'll teach you French, and a lot of these people were illiterate and they couldn't read, and so he says, hey, French lessons. I'll teach you. If you can't master it within a month, you get your money back. I mean, it sounds like something you could see today, right? You read French in a month or your money back. So people are signing up. Well, guess what he uses as his textbook? He's using the Bible, and he knows what he's doing, and he promises. He also was giving out medicine, like probably sort of the stuff you find on TikTok. Like, I'm not sure how medicinal it really was. Yeah, it was like, some of these do it at home kind of remedies. But it worked. It drew people in. Yeah, Dave.
I'm not clear. Do they get permission to preach in the churches, or are they doing street?
This is more lay level, street level at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. It's sort of building up to that, but Geneva is still Catholic at this point.
So who will give them permission to? Okay, I ain't going.
They're just doing it. Yeah, they're not in the pulpit yet.
How do they get in the pulpit eventually?
Well, eventually Geneva, it becomes Protestant, and then they're able. But at this point, it's more itinerant and street preaching. So it's and again, it's bringing people into their homes. It's doing Bible studies. It's very much a lay ministry and the teaching of language and so on. But the momentum is moving from Catholic towards Protestant. So on Pentecost Sunday, Guillaume Farel, he is in St. Pierre. Now again, I'm not clear. Maybe I didn't give the best answer just now. But he's preaching a sermon, so it could be that even though it's still a Catholic city, there's enough Protestants, maybe it makes it possible. But I'll have to look that up, because I'm not now 100% certain on what I just said. But anyways, because St. Pierre's, he's preaching in St. Pierre's, but there's Catholics in attendance, so I'm not sure how that all worked out. There's this Catholic priest in attendance on Pentecost in 1530, I think it's 1535. So we're really close to the flipping point for Geneva, because that was 1536. Pentecost Sunday, and he gets up and he preaches this sermon, and he denounces the Catholics, and a priest stands up, and he takes off his priestly vestments, hoping there's an undershirt on underneath, and he converts to Protestantism right on the spot. And it was like this big whoa. And so that became a pretty powerful moment in terms of the momentum shifting from Catholicism to Protestantism. By August, now this is where I think it's still a lay movement, but the momentum is strong enough towards Protestantism that they're still officially Catholic, but they actually ban the Catholic Mass. And basically all the Catholics, they leave the city. So Geneva has enough Protestant membership and enough Protestant people that the Catholics flee the city. Well, the Catholics put the city under siege. They don't want to go lightly. So I'm not sure exactly what it means when they put it under siege, but they basically, they're fighting back. They're trying to hold on to Geneva being a Catholic city, but it's not working. The Huguenots continue to flood into the city, and so things are, they're reaching this boiling point. And it's about a year, or about 6 months later, maybe a little more than that, maybe like 8 months later, that the city of Geneva officially votes to adopt Protestant teaching. So in the picture on the right, you can see, not very well, but you can see there's a plaque there between those two windows. It's a separate building from St. Pierre's Cathedral, but it's like right next door. You can practically touch them both at the same time. There's like a small alleyway between them. The building that the sign is on now is actually a museum of the Protestant Reformation. It's not a very good museum, I'll just be honest about it. It was a lot of it's sort of like, didn't have a lot to do with Calvin, and so I was a little disappointed by that. But the sign is kind of cool because it commemorates the exact spot where the citizens of Geneva met on May 21st of 1536, and they held a vote to officially adopt Protestant doctrine. And so the sign says, "We all unanimously, with the help of God, want to live this holy evangelical law." So that is a pivot point in Geneva's history. That's the moment where it officially flips, like the little Othello tile flips over from Roman Catholic to Protestant, and now it's a city zealous and passionate for Protestant teaching. This building is, I don't know how well you can see it, in the top left, just kind of underneath the leaves, that's St. Pierre's Cathedral. On the other side of that is the building I just told you about. So there's 3 buildings in a row. There's what's now that Protestant Museum, there's St. Pierre's, and then this is kind of behind, so if I'm facing all these buildings, there's the one, there's the cathedral, and then there's this building here. It's sort of a church, but now for Calvin, it functioned as what's called the auditoire. It was an auditorium. But for a long when it became a Protestant church, immediately it became a church for all these refugees that were, being funneled into Geneva. So later on, Calvin used it as his teaching auditorium. That's where he basically teaches seminary students. But for the time being, it was a church for all these immigrants who'd been, being pouring into Geneva. That happens almost immediately upon that vote. And they immediately establish a school, like a grade school, what we would call a grade school for teaching literacy. Because again, how are you going to understand the teachings of the Reformation if you can't read your Bible, or how will you read your Bible if you can't read? So teaching literacy was a huge part of the Reformation, and they do that almost instantaneously. So this feels like a triumphant moment for Geneva. Like, this is a big deal. But the Reformation hasn't even really, it's sort of one of these things, you haven't seen anything yet, because we haven't even talked about Calvin, right? And there's all of this, we haven't even mentioned, so at the bottom, where is Calvin in all of this? We'll start that next week. We're almost out of time, but because Calvin, I want you to get a sense of what Calvin is walking into. You would think that Calvin would show up and start teaching all this stuff that people are hungry for. They've been wanting to learn this, and they've been wanting to grow in the teachings of the Protestant Reformation. So Calvin shows up to do just that, and they kick him out of town. 2.5 years into his tenure in Geneva, they boot him out because they don't like what he's saying. So maybe that gives you a sense of sort of the volatility of the culture there, but yeah. But we'll start next week. We'll come back to Calvin, and we'll sort of rewind in history, so now you kind of see where we are in Geneva. We'll rewind to the year 1509 when Calvin is born, and I'll kind of walk you through his life. But let me pause, though, and ask if there are any questions. I've been talking a lot, but and you've been asking good questions, but I want to allow others. Yeah, Melissa.
Do you consider Calvin a French Huguenot?
I don't know that you'd count him as, I don't know that he would name himself a Huguenot. He was French, but I don't know, the Huguenots had a sort of defined body of beliefs. They were Protestants. If he wasn't actually a Huguenot, he'd be, pretty close, but I don't think he would claim that label for himself. I'm not certain about that, but that's just I've never seen him referred to as a Huguenot, so. Other questions? I forgot to tell you about this picture here. That's the Reformation wall in Geneva. It's about a 10-minute walk from St. Pierre's Cathedral, 15 minutes, I guess. And it's a monument to all the people I only got 4 of them there. There's, I forget, it goes, I think it's Farrell, Calvin, and then I can probably... Beza and Knox, there you go. And that one's Calvin, there's Farrell. There's other names on either side of it. It's kind of done in chronological order, and it kind of just retells and commemorates all the leaders of the Reformation. The neat thing about that is that Calvin is leaning forward. The others are kind of like flat against the wall, and Calvin is leaning forward just a little bit, kind of as a way to show that Calvin was, in terms of the Reformation, Calvin was prominent. He was in Geneva, probably anywhere, but in Geneva certainly he was prominent. And he's got his hand in the Bible. That's the other kind of important thing. He's got his hand holding Scripture, which of course fits with what we know Calvin to be all about. So I can show you. I got one second. I was going to show this as well, just because nearby and kind of in between St. Pierre's Cathedral and here is. Not sure if it's. Oh, you know what? Give me a second. I got to stop this. I'll show you a little bit of the town square, I guess, and because it goes back, it dates back to Calvin's time, and maybe just gives you, if you like, sort of what Geneva is all about. So there's Guillaume Farrell Street, and there's St. Pierre's Cathedral. That's the auditoire that I was telling you about. Gives you a little.
So is that the back of St. Pierre's Cathedral that we're seeing there?
Yeah, it's sort of. Kind of hard to describe because the streets don't run on a nice neat grid, right? And so they're, but yeah, you're kind of seeing, so if I'm standing right here, if I remember right, St. Pierre's is right here and you're about halfway down. So then you walk back and this way to get to the front, if that makes sense. Yeah. I want to show you the pictures though. Oops, that's the wrong way. I want to show you, yeah, so this is like, if I can show you this. This is like the town. This is like the town square where Calvin would have. I mean, the umbrellas and that weren't all there, but many of those buildings would have been. Yeah, maybe that gives you a better. So the Bourg de Four. That's the name of the square there, and it's yeah, it's pretty cool. Just a nice. Gives you just a little flavor of what. Oh, there's my lovely wife, and try not to show too many. But. Also the best crepes, just saying. So, all right, let me close it. Unless there are any other questions before I wrap up. I always say that at the end, and nobody wants to be the one that. Wait, I have. I'm trying to get out of here. All right. Yeah, that's right. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for your sovereign hand in human history. When we hear about these events, and when we even see how sometimes people behave, not always showing the love of Christ, not always displaying kindness and patience with people with whom they disagreed, sometimes being more zealous for truth than for love, and other times being more concerned about being loving and less concerned about truth. Father, you are patient with us, you are gracious, and we give you thanks and praise. And we rejoice knowing that you take all of human history, no matter how flawed and broken we may be, and you redeem it and use it towards your ultimate good and your ultimate purpose. Father, what a comfort and a joy to know that. So help us to be Christ-like, one filled with grace and truth. We ask and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.